Good morning again. Thanks all for coming. This session is about Agile and self-organization. So I guess the first task is already accomplished. Everyone's self-organized to show up for this session really early. Thanks for that. So I'll talk about our experience at Amazee. That obviously is not how self-organization will work for anyone, but I'm happy to share a couple of insights from our perspective. So my name is Josef Dabernig, or you will find me under Dasio on all the Twitters and Drupal.org. I work as the CTO for the Amazee Lab Zurich office, and that has been a process of taking over the responsibilities that Michael had earlier on. He is now the group CTO, and also distributing responsibilities across the teams because we want to have more self-organization. And also, as we have been growing, we have implemented a couple of strategies to reorganize our teams to basically distribute the decision making into the Scrum teams. And just recently, we also started with a not Scrum team, with a team that uses Kanban for maintenance. So I'll try in this session to kind of bring in all the perspectives that I've seen over the last 3 years, where we started with a lot of good processes already, but we didn't really have a definition for them. Then we started introducing Scrum, and along that way we have learned a lot. Who has been to the session about holacracy yesterday? So a few. So this will not really touch on that upper level management changes that Agile implies, but we are very aware that to be able to self-organize, to be able to work Agile, the whole company needs to go Agile, and probably it's not the easiest thing to ask your developers to work Agile if the contract is not Agile set up, for example. Who of you considers yourself working in an Agile environment already? So that's maybe like 30%, which is great. I guess we all react to changes on a daily basis, so I guess every one of us does work in an Agile way somehow. But if we, for example, in the beginning sign a contract that promises fixed price, fixed feature set, then really living up to the Agile values becomes difficult. And I think that for us at Amazee was also the most intimidating thought in the beginning when we thought about, okay, let's transition ourselves to become more Agile. Like, how are we gonna convince our clients that are like banks or like big television or like bigger companies in Switzerland to become Agile? Because maybe they don't really care about being Agile, they just care about getting the Amazee quality delivered in time, in budget, in scope. So there was a lot of thoughts that we had in the beginning. So what I'd like to do, to go through a couple of topics. So first of all, I want to highlight the motivation or the goals that we set for ourselves. Why do we want to go Agile? Then a bit about the history, what was our process, how we got there, where we are at the moment. I want to specifically highlight thoughts around team structure, because we started from a very non-defined team structure into iterations where we actually split the teams up to allow them to self-organize within their boundaries. We can take a look how that worked. To self-organize requires a lot of communication and a lot of more maybe collaboration that has earlier on been just part of a very defined process, but then when we allow the team to self-organize, they can define their own processes. And in order to allow that we want to talk a bit about communication and collaboration overall. And then I'd like to highlight like what exactly has happened around Scrum and how do we divide, for example, the roles in the company around Scrum. And let's wrap up with some outlook. If there's any questions that you have, feel free to ask me during the presentation already. or if you'd like to add something to agenda, we can also work in an agile way. So feel free to ask me to add some topics. Cool. So maybe we can try with, so you came to the session, maybe you have some goals. Who wants to tell me your goal for this session? Because that might be related to our goals here. And in order to work Agile, we all need to work together, right? Come on, need some volunteers. I know it's early. Okay,
so I want to see if you. I want to see what sort of things you're going to say about your teams and how the overlap is with my experience at my place of work. What we can.
Okay. So you want to find out if.
Or what we're doing well. Or,
yeah. You want to relate your experiences to our experiences?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Similarly, I'm just interested in how can you motivate the developers to take partially responsibility in a Scrum team.
Okay.
So we are also facing with this problem that's to share the responsibility together.
So how to motivate your team to take responsibility?
How to make them understand that their job not ended on COVID.
Oh yeah.
They have to somehow
think beyond.
further.
Yeah, there was a common thing, like when, so you specify something very well, and then you give it to the developer to implement, and then it comes back, and you think like, huh, that's great, but you didn't think about that, and that, and that. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk a bit about that. Cool. Anything else? Okay, so for us, one main goal was to involve our clients continuously. So, for example, some of the clients would only be there for an initial briefing, and then we would develop for 2 months, and then after 2 months we figure out like what we developed for them is maybe not what they really wanted. We already had a lot of so every ticket would go to the client, but there was not like big sign-off meetings where for all the projects, for example, we would make sure that the client really signs off what, for example, in Agile would be a sprint. So to involve the client more heavily in the process was really one of the goals. We definitely wanted to distribute the responsibilities. So a lot of weight was laying on who were considered the architects or the technical leads, so Michael and me in the beginning. Or the project managers. So everything basically went through that funnel, which is great because it creates a lot of consistency, right? Like 1 or 2 persons will basically make sure how everything gets specified, how everything gets implemented. We'll also test it, and we'll do a lot of quality assurance. But then if you have it, so we had that team of 12 developers overall. You really create like a single point of failure. Like if every ticket has to go through me, I will know about everything, but then I can never go on holidays, for example, which is kind of difficult. So distributing that across the team was one of the other goals. We also wanted to increase the knowledge sharing. So it's very efficient if one developer always works on one project because the developer will know the project very well. But then also that developer has all the domain experience about that single project. And as an agency, let's say right now we have like 50 clients that we do maintenance for or that we actively develop for. And having just 12 developers obviously creates a situation where it's more efficient to put single developers on single projects. But then the knowledge sharing is not there. And, so that was one of the other concerns that we wanted to change. We wanted to be able to react to changing requirements more efficiently. So in the beginning you create an offer and you write down, so we do like line items that are already quite abstract, so it doesn't create that very specific anticipation, but still it's a number that tells the client, hey, I will just expect 5,000 for this feature. but then only during design and concept, or having already implemented other features, you figure out that that interface connection will take more time because it's a SOAP interface, and we didn't know that upfront. So to be able to react to that more efficiently is one of the goals why we wanted to go Agile. Because without Agile, what our approach is, so we always have to file a change request, right? And then there's a change request, a change request, a change request. And nobody really wants to maintain that legacy of change requests as a project manager, for example. Also, one thing was to improve the accuracy of estimations. So if I, as a tech lead, do the estimations for the team, and the team has to implement it, the team will select, well, what you estimated is maybe what you would have worked on, but it's not what we will need to implement that task because we don't have the same experience as the tech lead has. Maybe as a tech lead, I can anticipate some complexities, but if I don't tell about those complexities to the team, I just put them into the estimation number, then first of all, we haven't learned about the complexities that I anticipated, and secondly, the team will not learn to better estimate themselves. So bringing down the estimations to the team that really implements it was one of the other big goals. And then we also want to improve our resource planning. So every week we would sit together and assign individual developers to individual projects to make sure that this deadline is met and this deadline is met. But that basically, from a developer's perspective, creates a situation where I don't really know what next week I'm going to work on, so why should I really feel responsible for the tasks if I'm not exactly sure if I will continue work on those? Yeah. Did I miss any of the goals? If not, let's continue. So we had that vision, and we were a bit afraid because when you talk to people about Scrum, you will get a lot of different ideas, and you will get that, let's call it like the hardcore Scrum that says, but you only need to work on one big project with one stable team, and then Scrum is going to be perfect. And we're like, well, we don't have one big project, and we don't have one stable team, so that's never going to work out. And we have all these developers that have like specific knowledge on those specific projects, so it will be basically impossible for us to get anywhere with Scrum. And so, but still we were willing to try it out. So we got external help from a coach that gave us consulting. So basically, together with project management, together with management, together with developers. So each of those we brought together with the Scrum coach and talked about what could be a way to bring Scrum or Agile to Amazee. And that basically meant, okay, we're going to form an Agile Scrum team that is about implementing change for the company. Sounded a bit weird in the beginning, and I think there was a lot of trial and error already from the beginning. So for example, what we did was create a delegation board that will define what can the Scrum team or the change team decide and what has to be escalated to management, for example. Where does the CEO, Urs Bucher, want to have his final say, because this is, for example, budget relevant. He wants really to know about any implication about budgets. But then if it's just about the internal processes of how tickets go through the pipeline, he doesn't really care. He only wants to make sure that the company runs in the right direction. So the delegation board really helped us to figure out all these kind of different, who wears which hat in order to take decisions. And I think I can recommend really looking into that. Even if you don't use Agile, have a look at the delegation board. So we formed the change team, and the change team basically along the way learned how Agile works. So we were writing our own stories, and along writing those stories we learned to formulate acceptance criteria, which are different than what we've been writing before, which was like implementation details. So in the beginning, we were always writing down like, for example, you have to implement that kind of, so you're gonna, for example, like if we put it into the context of creating a website, we would define exactly which fields the content type is gonna use, or how we're gonna configure panels to create an overview page and so forth. And instead of that, in Agile, what you wanna define is acceptance criteria, which will make the client happy. So you kind of try to visualize the end goal without thinking about how to get there. So, for example, basically you want to make sure that we deliver projects in quality and time, but we don't really specify how the team exactly is going to work on them. So that, as it sounds, was also like a bit like weird for us to have to write tickets, and like, for example, Urs, who was not really using Jira before that, he also went into Jira and basically helped us get the change tickets approved. So that was really cool, and I think that also helped us figure out already early in the beginning a couple of problems. So one of the big problems was that the change team didn't have full capacity, because everyone in the change team was a project manager, a developer, a CEO, so we were not on that team 100% time, but we were basically, for each sprint, we would talk about like, yeah, I think I will work like 15% on the change team process, and I think I'm gonna work like 30% of my time on the change process. And Scrum is really about being able to commit as a team together, we're gonna get this done. But if the team already feels like, I don't have full power, which is just the way it is. So I think early on we figured out that having people on a Scrum team that cannot fully concentrate, having that as their focus was already a challenge, just by creating that pilot project on the management level. But still, I think that was a valuable experience. And we got a lot of stuff figured out. It just took us way longer or we didn't feel as efficient. And maybe it helped us realize what we want, like which of those errors we don't want to have our team members make. So in order to, we figured out a couple of like the basics, how Agile would work. We had to determine how we're gonna start that process of implementing Scrum, and we didn't want to put everything around, but we wanted to create a pilot. So the first, for implementation or for development, so the first difficult question, like, how are we gonna build a Scrum team next to the non-Scrum workflow? And we did that for one of the client projects. And for that, we also learned a lot. Like basically, for example, during the Scrum project, we realized that we were too slow, so we added a new team member. And then that created a lot of additional discussion within the Scrum team, because the Scrum team had already agreed on a lot of details, but then had to onboard the new team member. And because the Scrum team was only working on one project, the load for the Scrum team also was, for example, blocked when the client had to sign off stuff and there was no work available. So that was kind of some difficulties that we saw with having one team project as the Scrum team. So we came then to the conclusion that we need the stable teams. And the idea was to distribute our projects across stable teams. I'd also like to add that we were not really happy about the idea to split up teams at all, because we're like all one family and everyone, like the flexibility of working together, and not the idea of dividing the team into two halves, and so they're gonna fight against each other or create their own subcultures, and or not even just not be able to work together. But then like, so we have specializations, backend developers, front-end developers. We try to consider as much full-stack developers as possible, but still there is, for example, a front-end developer that doesn't do backend at all. So when we split up the teams, we want to think about like how many front-enders and backenders do I have in each team, and then as we only had 3 backend developers, obviously one of the backenders would work solo in his team. So yeah, there was a lot of considerations or a lot of resistance on management level to even create such stable teams. When I look back, it's like obvious that it was still the right decision. Yeah, but basically we did it. So some other questions that came up was how big should the tickets be, right? I mean, so the Scrum teams themselves can figure out how big tickets should be. We basically, along the way, came up with a relative size that like above 8 story points, then the ticket should be split up. But that's really something that you, I guess, need to define within your teams, because some teams will prefer bigger stories, some teams will prefer smaller stories. Or how long should the backlog already be filled in order to make predictions about when which release is going to be done. So that was some questions in the beginning. And how many projects can we work on at the same time? So as mentioned, there's like 30, 40 projects. Now it's like 50 projects that the team had. It just creates a lot of projects at the same time anyway. So we could split that up into the two Scrum teams, but it also led us in the long run into the decision that we're going to have to create this separate maintenance team that can take the burden off the Scrum teams in order to be able to focus on. So right now we only have like 2 focus projects for the Scrum teams anymore. And I think that's already quite closer to the ideal of being able to focus on just one project. Yeah. So for the team structure, I've prepared here as well, so that we can like. So that's kind of how it has evolved. So right now we are in the means of having. So right now we have 2 Scrum teams. And each of the Scrum teams has ideally one project manager. So in the beginning we also had a case where we had 2 project managers within one Scrum team, or product owners. And so there's an advantage to that, because then one can talk to one big client and the other one can talk to the other big client, but the difficult thing for the team is really so that you have like 2 people that give priorities. So we came up with the definition that there should only be one product, or like, so there's a lot of different terms that we came up with. In the end we call them product owners, or chief product owner, because he's owning the products of all the different clients that the team works for, and basically funnels the priorities together. That doesn't mean that the product owner is the only one that can talk to the client, but for the bigger projects, we even bring the clients together into the estimation meetings with the team, so that the team, the better the team understands the client's perspective, the more valuable it is. Yeah, and the Scrum theory says there shouldn't be a product owner by the company at all. So the Scrum theory, you basically can put that onto the client, because if you work with one client long term, ideally you would bring the client already just next to the team. The client creates the stories and the team executes them. And what you also need is a Scrum Master. And for us, the Scrum Master is one of the developers. So, for example, Sarah and Dan, we pick them because they have like a lot of empathy, they are good communicators, they're well organized. So the Scrum Master's job is to make sure that the process is followed. Similarly to when we talked about the, and I will get to your question in a second. Similarly, when we talked about the holacracy yesterday, my understanding is that for holacracy, you really need that fixed facilitation of the meetings where, for example, governance is discussed. In Scrum, the most important rituals are the stand-up. So every day the team exchanges about the current status and that identifies any blockers. because we want to optimize for the speed, for the delivery. We want to get, we don't want to be blocked on anything. That's why, as a team, we need to identify any blockers. There's some room over there. That's the Scrum Master's job, and we also tried several roles for the Scrum Master. For example, in the very beginning, I was the Scrum Master for both teams, but it also felt a bit weird because, yeah, like from a management perspective, like as a Scrum Master, you should support the team, but if the team is used to get directions from you explicitly, then that for me like really felt a bit weird. Yeah. Actually, after now 2 years, we're actually thinking again about having me as a Scrum Master. So we're gonna try that again. So maybe next time I can give you an update if that worked on the second try. Yeah, and that's basically how we split up the roles. Depending on the team, some of the teams even splits down the stories into more front-end related and back-end related tasks. I don't think that's necessary, but that depends really on your team how to organize. There was a question first here.
Yes, you mentioned that you selected the Scrum Master from the developers, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Does they have the opportunity to code besides being a Scrum Master?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So we just looked recently at the amount of time they need to spend on being a Scrum Master, and it's like 10% of their time. And we also looked at how much we think that a dedicated Scrum Master will need to spend, and we think it's around 15 to 20% of a full work week per team. But you can always, you can always increase or decrease that as you like. But for us, it's important to not say like the Scrum Master will work 100% because then we have big billability issues. But if the Scrum Master doesn't do anything at all, then she or he will probably not be able to make sure that Scrum is well understood, enacted, and so forth. Michael?
And so the chief product owner doesn't code generally?
Yeah, that was so our product owners both have site building background. So initially, one of them did also site building because it's very efficient if you understand what the client needs and can think about, for example, UX and already create the fields. But in the end, it was a decision that because of the high workload, it doesn't make sense to do that anymore.
It's perfectly legitimate and exactly the answer I expected.
Cool. Yeah.
That's the person who, that's the interface with the client. And the other question was, how big are the teams?
So I have added that third team because currently we are in like a reorganization where we reduce the 2 teams that had 6 people on them and create basically 3 teams that have 4 people on them. And the reason why we do that is because the big teams have one role that has too much work is the role that talks to all the clients. And one issue that we also had is so we didn't define that from management who should be the team lead, but we gave the Scrum teams the opportunity to define their own team lead, which is basically the person that has the one-on-one meetings, that does the half-year reviews, that is like the personal report for those team members. And because that role should be a person with leadership, it was also so those are now responsible for the entire team and are also responsible for all the clients. One option would be to have another team lead within the team, and we're trying to get there. But we also another measure that we're doing is just to resize the team sizes, so that they also, for example, don't work on 3 projects at the same time, but only like 2 projects at the
So
same
it's a
time.
4 to 6 team size.
Yeah. I've seen Scrum teams that have like 10 or 12 people, but I haven't understood if that can really work. I think it will. If you do that, then you'll probably do it anyways more like a meta team and 2 sub teams. So Michael had a presentation yesterday for the big publisher that we worked together with, and just with them together we had one third team, but then they also had 2 more teams. If you have to collaborate on software with more than 6 people, maybe, I mean, you will get to the question anyways, that one team delivers features for the other team. Sometimes that's also something that we do, that one team can give a story to the other team. Yeah, thanks for that question. So I've also added 2 more bubbles here. So one bubble here is the UX and design team. So we're currently starting with a test where we have a dedicated UX and design team. So the idea here would be to kind of formalize a process that we already have, that before a project gets actually implemented, we will meet the client for some upfront high-level specifications or sell a design to them. And then there's another bubble here, which is the global maintenance team. And their task is to relieve the Scrum teams from the maintenance work. So after one big project has been implemented, there's a transition process where we hand off to the global maintenance team. And that's distributed, so that the global maintenance team does not only support what we see here, Amazee Lab Zurich, but also supports Cape Town and Austin, the other offices, with basically on a Kanban basis. Yep. So about communication and collaboration, I think that's really something where we can see that Scrum has improved a lot, because it just formalizes or it standardizes on communication. All the stand-ups make sure that everyone from the team knows what's going on. The retrospectives make sure that everyone is heard, so everyone can give praise to the team, but can also talk about like what the difficulties were. So we really make sure that those Scrum rituals are followed. The Scrum Master job is to make sure that the Scrum meetings take place. And we also had like external Scrum coaches work together with the team to facilitate those meetings in the beginning, to kind of give an inspiration of how an effective meeting can be held. And other measures for improving collaboration is just to make sure, for example, that everything also gets. So in the early beginning, we didn't really do code reviews, but now every code is reviewed via pull requests, can already be discussed there. We have a lot of ongoing notifications that keep the team informed via Slack, for example. So whenever a deployment happens, everyone in the team will see that the deployment is happening, because we get an automatic post after the pull request has been merged that the deployment is happening. We have Slack channels with all the different clients, so team can talk to the client. Doesn't have to be the project manager always that talks to the client, but the project manager will only make sure that the client is happy, basically. But all the team can work on that together. We have face-to-face meetings. So one important thing that we have been standardizing on is the one-on-one meetings. So either at least every 2 weeks, you can also be every week. You meet with your peer and talk about what is important to yourself, what is important to other peer, and give each other feedback. And that really helps not pushing everything to, for example, a half-year review, where, I mean, you really don't want to talk in the half-year review about stuff that has been annoying, but you already want to escalate it as early as possible. And for those who are not used to speak up, having those conversation one-on-one meetings, which are really like a safe space, it really helps them open up, and over time really make sure that communication is flowing constantly. We do a lot of pair programming, so that's also something where we have to put budget considerations in place, because we cannot always pair program everything. But in order to make sure that, for example, new technology is well understood, or that the hard problem can be fixed, a senior person doesn't have to like get the ticket and fix it and give it back, but maybe the senior person will just have a call or sit together in the office with the junior developer to solve those problems. So that's really effectively. Also so the different Scrum teams can show each other stuff. Every week we have demo days where we do a presentation and show each other what we have created. But we also have kind of sync meetings. In the books you will find this as guilds, for example. So all the front-end developers, for example, they have a bi-weekly or monthly meeting to discuss about the latest improvements that the front-end stack has brought or the challenges that are relevant to their expertise. So that really helps with the cross-team collaboration. And our lead engineer, Sebastian, he really jumps like from one team to the other to bring the best practices there, to also give additional feedback on the stuff that they are implementing. Because one of the big concerns was that now that we have the self-organizing and the team can do everything themselves, it's not always visible to the other developers which of the best practices have been implemented in one team and the other. So it's really important to make sure that either there's people that actively transport that knowledge, or even better, that the teams actively collaborate. So for example, the two Scrum teams also have started a Slack channel where they can ask each other questions and talk about best practices. So that's really cool. Other than that, there's also bi-weekly staff meetings, so that's for the entire company. And maybe also to add, so each of the Scrum teams has their stand-up where they can talk about work. That takes like 15 minutes. Shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. And then also as a company, we have a stand-up that takes only 10 minutes, where we quickly see each other via Zoom. So there's like a circle in the office where we basically stand all together. There's like 10 or 12 people standing together, and then there's another 10 people connected via Zoom. And we changed a bit. Like in the beginning, we did it just tell what you did yesterday, what you do today. But that ended up enumerating all the meetings that, for example, I have, which is a lot. And then the developer will say, well, I work on those two projects, and the other developer will say, I work on those two projects, and it kind of gets really repetitive. So we try to get over that with asking more specific questions, like what was the most productive collaboration that you had yesterday, or what were you surprised about being able to solve yesterday? So those questions that and you will see that during answering those questions, everyone will like start to reflect and say something that really also inspires others. So that's great. You had a question?
You said that you had a time limit of 10 minutes for each daily stand-up.
Yeah.
How do you restrict these time blocks? You just you would shut up because the next thing is coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most effective way for us was really to change the question, because or to also give feedback like, yeah, thanks. Can we please go on? I mean, people are careful about their time, and in the big company stand-up, it's 18 people, so there will be anyways the pressure of let's have this being efficient as possible. And as the company stand-up is like very high level, like we don't want to go into any details, it's quite easy. For the Scrum stand-ups, so for example, the Scrum Master role would be to make sure that the time box is held. And what the Scrum Master can do is like, oh, I'm seeing this discussion is derailing, can you please set up a separate meeting for that? Like the stand-up is only really there to identify what's important to talk about, maybe, or maybe already come to a decision, but if we are not able to come to a decision as the Scrum team, we should figure out, is it something that the entire team needs to talk about? Then this stand-up can be extended anyways, or we can find a separate meeting for it. Or often it's that just two people need to figure out the solution together.
And does the past is still fitting in this time, what you did yesterday?
Does the what, sorry?
We try to save some time that we just leave out the question that what you did yesterday. And we try to save some time only focusing on what you are planning to do today.
Yeah.
And sometimes it even does not happen. So
Okay.
I'm just asking that in this 10 minutes you have still time to answer the question what you did yesterday.
Mhm. So we don't go several rounds. In the one round, I will answer the question from a yesterday perspective and from a today perspective. So the question is always like, what's the most productive collaboration, for example? And then I will first say, yesterday my most productive collaboration was work on offer X with person Y. And today I'm really looking forward to meet client Y to discuss blah. And that's like really sharp, so that works well. But I mean, can give it a try. Maybe it doesn't work, or maybe it works.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and as Amazee is a group, there's also monthly briefings where all the companies meet together, like more than 50 people now. But that's mostly informative. Like we tell each other about the numbers, about what we have achieved, and so forth. Cool. Yeah, let's move on a bit about some more details around Scrum. So for the velocity tracking, in the beginning we were really estimating around hours, but then we convinced ourselves and the team and also the customers that we can estimate in story points. And I would really like to encourage you doing that, because an hour estimation is not really something that will be inclusive to your team members, because the slower team members and the faster team members have to agree on pace in terms of time, which is not really realistic. So you will just end up estimating around hours that no one really feels are the right ones. And estimations are never accurate anyway, so what you really want to do is to quickly identify the complexity of a task, and it's much easier to do that via story points. And you really shouldn't look at just individual tickets, but overall, as a sprint, it will always even out. So that's a recommendation there. We already talked a bit about the team sizes, so 4 to 6 works well for us. Yeah, we are trying to reduce the number of projects per team, and in general, I mean, there's a lot of literature that tells us that context switching is expensive. So if we put too many projects or too many tasks into a team, it won't make it more efficient, but it will just, yeah, things will just get worse. So also make sure that the team plans for some buffer time, or also has time to work on internal tasks, for example. So now the Scrum teams, the stable teams, they also take tasks like let's write a blog post or let's improve that continuous integration workflow, also put it into their sprint planning. And it's like a unified sprint planning. So we don't have individual client sprints, but we have team sprints. And in the team sprint, we can work, for example, 80% on that big client project, and then maybe 10% on that other project, and the other 10% we can work on internal improvements, which is still not perfect, because ideally you would have only one project, but that's not realistic. So I'd encourage to try that out. Yeah, with the I think Scrum also, one big potential is to look at your own skill set in a more broad way. So we talk about T-shaped profile, that for example a developer can have a specialization being good at front end. But for example, Sarah is also really good at site building, also really good at talking to the client. And as the Scrum team can all distribute the tasks within themselves. For example, the person, their job is to talk to the client. That person can also delegate within the team to say like, I don't have time for specifications, or my goal is anyways to have specifications that the team cares more about. So why won't I just ask a developer to do the specification together with the client? And that had really empowering results. And I think that also goes into the direction that we had a question in the beginning, like how do I motivate the team? Well, I can really motivate the team by giving them the context that they need to accomplish the goals of the company, but also to give more responsibility to the team to figure out how we can solve the problem together, rather than already slice it up into individual pieces and have the developer. I mean, so that's the difficult balance, right? Like, Also, as human beings, we like the routine. So if we get challenged every day with a new challenge, maybe that's also too much. So sometimes but in the end, it's a team decision how we want to distribute the responsibilities to get the project done. And yeah, we are quite confident how that works so far. How are we about time? When is the time box ending? Do I have time until
13
point?
minutes left.
Sorry?
13 minutes left.
Okay. So there's a break after the presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a coffee break.
Perfect. Thanks. Cool. Something else about the roles? Yeah, I don't think so. So something that we don't see here is that these guilds. So for example, there's project management, there's front end, then there's back end. As a developer, you can be part of various of those. So maybe a full stack developer could be both a part of front end and part of back end. But then there would be kind of across the Zurich office, but also across the entire Amazee group, there would be someone in charge of organizing regular meetings for those guilds to exchange about best practices or to help us to put strategic efforts to, for example, improve in general our stack, improve our base installation, or for example, where we coordinate when we submit sessions for DrupalCon. That works really well. I'd like to add a few challenges and learnings that we had along the way. So one continuous challenge is to work on multiple projects. I want to share quickly how that looks right now. See if you can see that. So as you can see, LTS, the teams give themselves a name, and the LTS team is called Lords of the Sprint, and we have SOS, which is straight out of Scrum, so they kind of create their own identity, which is cool. We can see that there is, for example, so the team had too little capacity, and they added Lise from the Cape Town office, so she's helping out right now. But overall, the team is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people as a stable team. And each of the team members can look at their own tasks. We try, so that's like going back and forth. In the beginning, the team always wanted to assign all the tasks in the beginning to each of them so that every developer will know how much they work on. But from an agile perspective, it's not really good to decide in the beginning what everyone will work on, because one person will run out of work and the other one will have too much work. So I'd encourage to convince your teams that you only need to assign a task when you really work on it. And it goes through our standard process, but we can see that, for example, Zurich Tourism has a lot of tickets, Lux has very few tickets, and then most of the rest is Parabligi. So those are like how the different tickets are organized. And then in the backlog, we basically plan those tickets together and see how much can be worked on. And basically bring it together into one sprint. Then, another one would be just to give like a high-level view of how a sprint is run. Like, we calculate our availability. That will help the team to figure out how much story points they can commit to, because maybe a person is on vacation or has some other duties, and then we figure out afterwards to run the retrospectives. We're using a tool called Retromat. So that's quite fun. It basically does a random generation of retrospective. So there's different stages: set the stage, gather data, generate insights, decide what to do, and close the retrospectives, which is like the format that we follow to have a good retrospective. But then, so that retrospectives don't get too repetitive, the Retromat allows you to generate basically a framework to decide upon how I'm going to run my team through the retrospective. and then the team uses real-time board as an online visual collaboration tool where they can all put cards on the board and talk about like what was important to them, and so forth. Yeah. So that's a lot better than what we had in the beginning. Was just a Google Doc with with a table, what went well, what didn't went well, what we want to improve, and everyone was looking at each other already, like saw each other type, and yeah, it was not that collaborative. No. Oops. Cool. Something that's interesting as well is the definition of done. So make sure that the Scrum team understands well how they define something as being done. And what we're always struggling with is because there's multiple clients and there's different paces that the clients work in. And our definition of done is it's deployed on the live site. But that means that the development team doesn't have full control about finishing their sprint. We need the buy-in from the client to be able to deploy tickets at a specific time to really make sure that the sprint is finished. And an alternative solution to that would be to create a separate board where deployments are happening outside of the sprint. But that's something that the team has decided to not to do because we want everything on one board. But it kind of visualizes, let's say, an impediment that hinders us from really finishing sprints 100% all the time because the deployments are part of the sprint. We also identified different work modes, and that basically has a manifestation into the different teams. So the Scrum teams work on something that can be planned well. The 2-week sprint cycles create a situation where in the worst case, you need like 4 weeks to implement a feature request. Like if it's very just after sprint planning, then you can only put it into the next sprint planning, and it will get done 2 weeks after that. So if you go for Scrum, just be considerate that this will make you a bit less agile, or you cannot react as fast as you can do, for example, with Kanban, where every day you can reprioritize. We have a process that's called the fast lane process. So if there's really something, a blocker ticket that only the Scrum team can take care of, then it will still get put into the sprint. But our vision is really that the global maintenance team can relieve the Scrum teams from any outside influence that will distract them from meeting their sprint goals. So that's how we balance that at the current time. Yeah. What's next? So next for me is to try to be a Scrum Master at Amazee starting in October. I'll work with at least one of the teams to actually be the Scrum Master. What I do right now is I have like regular exchange meeting with the Scrum Masters to kind of distill the best practices. And that I think will also give us more capacity to, for example, look more on how the KPI fulfillment is, or in general, like evolve our Scrum processes. That concludes my presentation. Is there any questions? Yeah.
I have a question about how do you, what do the clients say? How do they react? Like, for example, you said that the lead time for a new feature now is about a few weeks before it actually gets to the sprint and gets delivered. So you have a fast lane, but you probably try not to use it too much. So how do you not have clients who try to put everything into the fast lane and to actually get it released this week?
Yeah. So it was definitely some adaptation needed for some of the clients who were really used to work fast lane. Those clients who were really used to work fast lane were mostly maintenance projects that we have already migrated to the global maintenance team, and they are really happy about the fast reacting time. If we So Scrum, we really use it to create something new. And there, the client has more understanding that we need a process like Scrum where we only every 2 weeks want to reprioritize. So in the end, I agree, it was a tough conversation to have with some of the maintenance clients, but we fixed that with the Kanban workflow. For the new development, I don't really see a necessity or I don't see it happen too much that we have to change priorities within the sprint. And we can always do that. Like, it's just important to make sure that the team commitment remains the same. In order to use the fast lane process, everyone needs to give basically consent to say, like, okay, we understand this is really a top priority shift and it will happen. But what I'd encourage to do is like make sure that it's a common decision by the whole team. So to keep them feel like we are committed to the sprint. Does that answer? Cool. Urs.
You mentioned that the Scrum teams during one sprint are working on different projects.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have one backlog for different projects, or
Yes.
one backlog for each project?
I mean, so because Jira has a permission system, and we also have multiple boards in Jira, we basically, together with the client, when we look at their sprint planning, the client will only see their own tickets. But basically, what we do in Jira is that we have like a preferred for sprint, and like, so depending on, some of the teams already create like a couple of sprints ahead so that they kind of can do like a release planning. But those releases, for example, for Zurich Tourism, we had like client-specific releases ahead. But then we need to make sure that those client release tickets will anyways get into the unified sprint plan.
Do you have any clients who delegate the development?
Yeah, I mean that's what we have here. So if the client is not able to, or our standard is that we provide a product owner proxy, and the client can choose. Like ideally, we tell the client, the more you do, the less you have to pay us to do it for you, and the more genuine will the quality of tickets be if you can specify good ones. But as being an agency, we cannot expect every client to have a trained product owner, or it's like very rare cases where we have really good product owners. But our vision would be to find more and more projects where the client has a professional product owner. That means the client can work much better, efficient together with the team. But it's on a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
And also, yeah, so, yeah, no. There was a question there?
Yeah, so you talked about guessing the complexity of a task first, but what do you do after that? Do you set a time box according to the complexity, or what's the next step in the process?
Right. So, I mean, the first thing is in the estimation, and we use a Jira plugin called Agile Poker, where the team basically figures out together how much they want to estimate. Then, based on that, it will be taken into the sprint, and we have a definition that says if you work really long on a task, and the problem is that as soon as we talk about that, we already talk about converting story points to hours. You know, like, so how can I figure out if I go over in 5 story points ticket? I can only figure that out if I start converting it to hours, and that already creates a problem. But anyways, like, the team will have a sense of, okay, a 2 points ticket shouldn't be worked on more than, let's say, 6 hours. So then the team's the responsibility of a developer is to escalate to the project manager to say, I'm probably going to work more on that. Can we figure out a solution together with the client? Or do we have budget for that or not? But to be honest, it's a process that we have to remind us again and again. But if actually it evens out quite well, so I don't think it's necessary to look at every ticket all the time, but if you have big spikes, then you will find that out, for example, in the retrospect, or you can highlight it in the retrospective. Yeah, it's a matter of finding a good balance there. Cool, that's it. We're over time. Thank you very much.